Snow fell soft as ash over the mining town of Ash Hollow, wrapping its crooked streets and sagging roofs in a pale hush. Evening came early that winter, turning the sky copper gray as lanterns blinked to life one by one. Down the narrow alley beside Hattie June's laundry, a woman trudged through the drifts with a wicker basket hugged close to her chest. Steam still rose faintly from the clothes inside, until the cold turned it to mist and then to nothing. Her name was Elsie Mae Carter, and the townsfolk whispered it the way they might speak of an illness, something to pity, something to avoid. Her steps left deep impressions in the snow, each one heavy with years of silence. The bells from the church tower rang somewhere far off, muffled by the storm. They said the Lord made every woman to bear life. She murmured to no one. But he passed me by. The wind answered with a low moan through the eaves, the laundry house. Her hands were cracked raw from lye soap and cold water. She worked until her fingers bled, scrubbing the dust and sweat of miners from their shirts. Sometimes, when she closed her eyes, she imagined herself lighter, graceful, wanted, but the mirror told no such lies. Her frame was soft and wide, her cheeks ruddy from the chill, her eyes tender but tired. It had been 5 years since the doctor told her she'd never bear a child. 5 years since the laughter started. The empty cradle, they called her. Men joked that she'd been built for work, not for love. Even the preacher, Reverend Clay, had found ways to lace judgment into his sermons. Some women, he'd said, must have sinned deep to be barren. And yet she endured, washing, mending, bowing her head when the gossip swirled around her like dust in the saloon air. The cruelest moment came one night at the Red Lantern Saloon. Sheriff Amos Grady, all whiskey and swagger, had raised his glass and shouted, "I'll wed her myself if no man wants her. But Lord help me, I'd rather wed my horse." The room erupted in laughter. Elsie had stood outside that night, hands trembling, hearing every word through the swinging doors. She didn't cry then. She just walked home under the frozen stars, holding her basket tight. It was a week later when Silas Boone walked into town. He came from the mountains, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a coat of wolf fur and a face half hidden beneath a beard white with frost. He spoke little, bought flour and bullets, and left quick. The town called him half-wild, said he slept beside bears and talked to ghosts. But when he stepped into the laundry one evening, Elsie looked up from her scrubbing and felt something shift inside her. He carried a sack of pelts. "Can you wash these up?" His voice was quiet, deep as creek water. She nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "Yes, sir." When he left, the room felt strangely emptier than before. Days later, he returned, this time with smaller things that didn't need washing. He seemed to come for no reason at all. Once, he stayed to help her lift a frozen bucket from the well. Another time, he left a neat stack of firewood by her door and said nothing about it. The townsfolk began to notice. Hattie June warned her, voice low and kind but edged with fear. "You be careful, Elsie. Men like him don't belong to this town, and folks'll say you're desperate if you keep on." But it wasn't desperation that drew her toward him. It was quiet, the way he listened when she spoke, the way he looked at her without mockery. One evening, she hummed a hymn while folding a miner's coat. Silas paused near the door, listening. When she stopped, embarrassed, he said softly, "You got a fine voice, Miss Carter." Her hands shook as she pretended to fold another shirt. "No one's ever said that before." "Maybe no one's been listening right," he replied. That night, she couldn't sleep. She watched the snow fall through the cracks in her window, the sound of the wind a lullaby she didn't trust. In her chest, something fragile stirred. Not hope, but the memory of it. Sunday came, and with it Reverend Clay's sermon. The church was crowded, candles flickering. He spoke of fruitless vines and women who defied the Lord's purpose. Each word was a dart. The congregation shifted, eyes turning, whispers floating like smoke. Elsie sat small in the last pew, shawl pulled tight, the old shame crawling up her throat. When she left, Sheriff Grady was waiting outside, breath fogging in the cold. "Don't get notions, Elsie," he drawled. "Mountain men like Boone don't take kindly to barren women." Her lips parted, but no words came. That night, the wind rose again, shrieking down the empty streets. Snow fell thick as feathers. She walked out into it, coat thin, heart heavier than ever. Her breath turned white before her. She didn't know where her feet carried her. only that she wanted the noise to stop, the cruel laughter in her head to fade. The storm deepened. The world went white. She stumbled once, then again, her basket tumbling into the drifts. By the time Silas Boone found her, the snow was waist-deep. He'd seen her faint shadow staggering near the frozen creek and ran, the wind cutting his face raw. "Elsie!" he shouted, though she couldn't hear him. When he reached her, she was on her knees, lips blue, eyes half closed. He lifted her into his arms as if she weighed nothing. Snow clung to her hair, her lashes. She tried to speak, maybe his name, but her voice failed. "Hold on," he muttered, pressing her close, his own breath ragged in the storm. The cabin door slammed open. He laid her near the fire, stripped off her wet coat, and covered her in furs. His hands worked quickly, rubbing warmth into her fingers, her arms. The fire roared, lighting the log walls in gold. "Come back," he whispered. "You hear me? Ain't no woman broken for needin' warmth." For the first time in her life, someone held her not from pity, but because they couldn't bear to let her go. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside that small cabin, the light grew stronger. The wind howled, the fire cracked, and two lonely souls, one believing herself unworthy, the other too haunted to try again, sat at the edge of a new beginning neither had dared to dream. Morning came soft and slow over the mountains, the storm spent and the sky pale with light. Inside the cabin, warmth breathed from the hearth, a steady orange glow flickering across rough-hewn walls. Elsie Mae Carter stirred beneath the heavy furs, her lashes trembling. For a moment, she didn't know where she was, only that the air smelled of pine smoke and coffee, and something she'd nearly forgotten: safety. Silas Boone was by the fire, turning a tin pot with one hand, his broad back to her. Steam rose from it in gentle curls. He glanced over his shoulder when she moved. "You're awake," he said softly. Her voice was barely a whisper. "You saved me." He shook his head. "Just brought you in out of the cold. You did the rest." She tried to sit up, but winced, dizzy. He knelt beside her, offering a cup of broth. His fingers brushed hers as he passed it, and she felt that strange, steady warmth again, not just from the cup. Days turned to weeks. Snow pressed against the windows, burying the world beyond the cabin in white silence. The storm had sealed them together, and in that quiet, something tender began to take root. She helped him mend shirts and sweep the floor, shyly humming while she worked. He chopped wood, cooked stew, mended traps by the firelight. They spoke little, but silence felt safe between them, not empty. Sometimes, while she stirred the pot, she'd catch him looking at her as if she were a soft miracle, something fragile yet needed. One evening, she found him mending a tear in his coat with clumsy stitches. She smiled faintly and said, "You're butchering that poor thing." He grinned. "Never was much good with thread." "Let me," she said, taking the needle from his rough hand. Their fingers touched, lingered, then slipped apart. She bent to the task, the firelight tracing her round cheeks and the soft curve of her lips. He watched quietly, heart heavy with a kind of ache he hadn't felt in years. Not desire, but reverence. When she handed the coat back, he said, "You got steady hands." She shook her head. "Not always. Sometimes I shake so bad I can't hold nothing still." He looked at her, really looked, and said, "You held on through worse than most ever could. Don't call that broken." The word stopped her. For years she'd believed herself cursed, unfit, useless beyond labor. Yet here was a man who saw her differently, not as a joke or burden, but as a living thing worth saving. The fire popped. She turned away, eyes wet, pretending to busy herself with the pot. Winter dragged on. Wind clawed at the door some nights, but the cabin stayed warm. They found a rhythm, his quiet strength, her gentle hums, a dance of two hearts learning to share the same small world. Sometimes she'd watch him chop wood through the window, his breath fogging in the cold. She felt something stir in her chest, equal parts fear and longing. He was not like other men. There was no cruelty in him, no mockery, just a steady kindness that disarmed her. One night, when the wind had settled and the fire burned low, she told him the truth. "They said I'm too broken to ever be a mother." Silas didn't speak at first. The flames reflected in his gray eyes. "You believe that?" "I did. Maybe still do." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You bring things to life just by touching them, Elsie, don't let no fool doctor or preacher take that from you. Something inside her, frozen for years, cracked and melted at his words. She bit her lip, eyes glistening. Why are you kind to me? He hesitated. Because kindness is what saved me once. And then, quietly, he told her about his wife, how she died in a blizzard years ago, heavy with child. How he'd buried them both beneath a pine. Didn't think I'd ever speak to a woman again, he said. Then you came walking through town like the last bit of light left in this world. Her breath caught. The silence that followed was sacred, fragile as the first thaw. She reached across the small table and covered his hand with hers. Neither spoke again that night, but their hearts had already shifted. Two broken things leaning toward warmth. When spring began its slow whisper through the pines, Silas prepared to ride into town for supplies. Best you stay here, he said gently. Roads are still bad. She nodded. I'll be fine. But news travels fast in small towns, faster than mercy. Word had spread, the fat Carter girls living up with the mountain man. By the time Silas rode down for flour and powder, the gossip had turned to venom. Reverend Clay called it sin. Sheriff Grady sneered from the saloon porch, spitting tobacco as he muttered, "Ain't no mountain man keepin' a barren woman for long." When Silas returned days later, he found Reverend Clay outside his cabin, hat in hand, but voice sharp. "This woman's soul's at stake, Boone. You can't hide sin behind snow." Silas stepped between them, his voice calm but heavy as thunder. "You best turn around, Reverend. She ain't sinine. She's livin'." Grady chuckled from his horse. "Ain't no sense wastin' words on her, Boone. You'll tire of her soon enough. Maybe then we'll send her where she belongs." Silas's eyes hardened. "She belongs right here." The sheriff's smirk faltered. No one argued with a man like Silas Boone. They turned and rode off, muttering into the wind. Inside, Elsie stood by the fire, shaking. "They'll never stop," she whispered. He stepped close. "Let him talk. Wind always dies down." She looked up at him then, tears slipping over her cheeks. "Why do you keep me here?" "'Cause I want to," he said simply. "'Cause this place felt dead till you came." Her breath trembled. "Silas," he brushed a strand of hair from her face, his calloused fingers tender. And in that touch, wordless, reverent, the world shifted again. The fire crackled, rain began to fall outside, and their foreheads met in quiet surrender. Days turned into a soft spring. Snow melted from the eaves, and the creek began to sing again. Elsie tended small shoots of wildflowers that pushed through the thawing earth. Her body felt strange, restless. She tired easily. At first, she thought it was the long winter catching up to her, until the morning sickness came. She sat on the porch, the world spinning slow around her. Tears welled as the truth took root. The impossible had happened. Life stirred within her. When Silas found her crying softly, he knelt in the dirt beside her. She took his hand and pressed it to her belly. "I thought I couldn't," she whispered. "They said I'd never." He looked at her, eyes shining, and whispered, "Guess the Lord had his own timing." She sobbed then, not from fear, but release. He pulled her close, and they held each other as rain fell warm and steady, washing the last of the snow from the mountainside. Inside the cabin, the fire glowed brighter than ever, casting gold on their faces. The silence between them spoke all the words the world had ever stolen. Later, townsfolk would tell it as a miracle. The barren woman who found love in the wild and came back bearing life. But the truth was quieter, simpler. Two hearts healed each other, and in their healing, something sacred was born. And if you listen close, on nights when the wind hums through Ash Hollow, you can almost hear an old voice say, "Sometimes the world breaks us so light can get in. Sometimes the womb they swear is empty holds the greatest miracle of all, hope." And if ever you think you're too broken to be loved, remember her. Even the coldest winter can end in spring.